Good morning, everyone. My name is John Capucci, and I am the principal and vice chancellor here at Assumption University in Windsor, Ontario. I want to begin by welcoming everyone to the Father Joe Quinn Social Justice Series. Before we begin our series, I'd like to acknowledge that Assumption University resides on the traditional territories of the Three Fires Confederacy, comprised of the Odawa, the Ojibwa, and the Potawatomi. We also acknowledge the gift of land from the Huron. Given that many of our guests are joining us from various areas, we encourage you to honor the land in which you live and work. Tracing its origins to 1857, Assumption University is one of the most historic Roman Catholic institutes of higher learning in Canada. Informed by the Basilian tradition, we seek to empower individuals to cultivate goodness in themselves and others, embody discipline in their path towards excellence, and recognize the importance of constantly pursuing knowledge throughout their lives. As mentioned, this seminar series is named in the honor of the late Father Joe Quinn, CSB, who served as interim principal and president of Assumption University and dedicated his priestly ministry to social justice causes. This series' purpose is to present contemporary social justice issues to students in the community. This year's topic is homelessness, an issue of serious concern in Windsor, Essex, and beyond. At this time, I am pleased to welcome our series facilitator, Ms. Susie Sawicki.
Thank you, Dr. for those welcoming remarks and the introduction. I'm very honored to be hosting today's social justice series and for being with all of you today. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce today's panelists. Joining us today first is Safia Abdul. Safia is a clinical social worker and therapist at BRI Counseling and is a PhD student. Welcome, Safia. Next, joining us is Michael Braithwaite, serving as the Chief Executive Officer of Blue Door. Welcome, Michael. Also joining us today is Jeffrey Manier from Feeding Windsor, Essex. Welcome, Jeffrey.
How y'all doing?
And finally, we are still waiting on, and hopefully Christine Wilson Furlong will be joining us, and she is the administrator of Help Homeless Center. So thank you so much for our incredible panelists for joining us today. I'd like to begin our discussion about homelessness at a local level. Safia, you were born and raised in Windsor. What do you believe are some of the primary causes of homelessness in your area?
So I think for the way that I will be framing a lot of what I'll be talking about from my perspective is very much from like a human rights approach. And I think that a lot of the times when we talk about different causes of homelessness, there's a lot of focus on the individual. But I think the main thing, and I'll keep that very short, is the reason and the causes of homelessness is that people are not housed. And I think that putting people in homes is the way that we get rid of homelessness on a like base level. But again, on top of that, I think some of the primary causes that we see is poverty. So like a lack of income and a lack of affordable housing. As we know, housing is very, very expensive. And then on top of that, there is discrimination that people that are unhoused or experiencing homelessness face. So all of those things combined create the issue of homelessness. And I think I'll keep it short and sweet for that one.
Absolutely. Those are all great points. And moving towards Michael, working in the York region with Blue Door, the largest housing, health, and employment provider, what do you believe are some of the primary causes of homelessness in your area?
Well, unfortunately, Susie, there's many paths into homelessness, very few out. For youth, it's 80% of youth in a 2017 national survey that experienced homelessness between the age of 12 and 16 said it was family breakdown. So it's divorce, abuse in the family. It could be coming out to your parents. You're not allowed to live there anymore. Culture clashes sometimes in New York region, and mental health crisis, but also system breakdown as well. 70% of youth who experience homelessness have at one point or another touched the child welfare system. And at the age of 19 for many people who grow up in that system. It finishes at 19 and you're pushed into homelessness. So we've got to fix some of the systems that are actually launching people into homelessness and causing that as well. And of course, as Sophia said, right, it really is, there's pieces around income as well, right? Where, right, the Globe and Mail did a survey just recently, or put out some research around 30% of your actual household income is what you're supposed to spend on rent. And if that's the case in the GTA, a household would have to make $90,000 to afford a 1-bedroom apartment in the GTA. And to put it in perspective, someone who might be on Ontario Works, which is welfare or disability, is bringing in about $8,000 or $13,000 a year. So you see the gap.
Absolutely. And can you just maybe for our young people watching today, can you maybe explain a little bit more about what the welfare system is for somebody who maybe doesn't know?
If you're unable to work for one reason or another, you're in between jobs, maybe it's your health, etc. Our government actually will give you a monthly supplement to live on. That amount is about $700 a month. And has not really changed in the last 25 years. If through your doctors you qualify for a disability check, that's about $1,200 per month. Again, not a lot of money, especially when you have some special needs around that disability for the government support. That has not changed while inflation continues to go up and up and up. So things keep costing more, but that income level. And so you see a push for a universal basic income or a livable wage, which is around $21 to $24 an hour for people. Minimum wage is $15. So again, gaps in how people can afford to live.
Absolutely. That really does put it into some perspective for people watching today. And then we also have Jeff here. Jeff is actually working with Feeding Windsor Essex right now and is helping out today. Yeah. And this is an organization that supports people struggling with food security. What do you believe are some of the primary causes of homelessness in your area?
Well, particularly, like I'm sure every city has their own issues. Many probably have the same issues. I find in Windsor, through my own experience, I've been homeless before myself for a short time, about 10, 12 years ago. But I was generational addiction. Family breakdown, from what I see, is primarily the problem. Like, there's people in homes who live alone. There's people in homes who aren't with their families, like their children are in the streets or their spouse is in the streets, and people don't know where each other are. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of lack of communication. So, like, for me, what I see is like the root problem is with the family, because irregardless of economics, or irregardless of, people's persuasion sexually or whatever, our children shouldn't be out on the street, right? Like, so for me, I would have to say the primary problem in this city is the family breakdown, just the community not supporting each other, parents at odds with their children, children at odds with their parents, and all of that just, causes drug abuse, and disassociation, mental illness, and then you have people littered in the streets. So that's my perspective personally.
And can you just give us a brief synopsis of what you do at
Feeding Windsor?
Yeah, Feeding Windsor.
What I'm doing, I can show you what I'm doing right now. Actually, if you see, there's meals all behind me here.
Wow.
So we put out, I'm not even sure, Mike, how many meals do we put out? 200 to 300 meals per day. So what we do is, these lovely ladies over here, say hello. That's Ruth, and Jane's in the back here. They prepare all the meals, 200 to 300 a day.
Wow.
And I package them all in various forms. Some go to the iCheck hotel, some go to the COVID recovery. We have a lunch program for seniors at a very, very low cost, where they get 20 meals per month. So we put all this out every single day as a way to cut meal costs, so that people can use the money to shelter themselves. right? It's like,
That's
you know, you have to
incredible.
offset costs somewhere. So if we can provide low cost meals or free, many are free, for like the, you know, the hotels and all that are free. The meal programs for the seniors are very economical. So, you know, less money on food means more money for rent, medications, other things that are, you know, as important. So that's the way we kind of keep people off the street. Our way of helping is, you know, free food, low cost food, 7 days a week. So yeah, that's what we do here.
Thank you so much for showing us that.
Yeah, it was kind of janky, sorry, but
that's
yeah.
okay.
But you
Yeah,
get the
and we'll move on towards our next question now, back to Sophia. Canada is facing a homelessness crisis. The impact of homelessness in Canada on citizens who find themselves without a home is extremely challenging and diverse. What do you believe is one of the biggest myths about homelessness?
I think this has been said a little bit so far in what we've been talking about, but I think one of the biggest myths is that homelessness is an individual issue, like a blame kind of perspective that we carry in society. I think as Michael and Jeff have talked about, there is a lot of systemic and community factors that go into why people might be experiencing homelessness. But a lot of times in society, that's kind of turned around on the individual as they're lazy, it's their fault, it's an individual issue. And I think that takes away the responsibility, kind of like Jeff was saying, of the community to support people and to support each other. Kind of that perspective of, you know, unhoused people should just get jobs, and all of that really blame kind of language that we kind of hear in society. So I think that's one of the biggest myths is that it's an individual issue, that people can just get jobs, that the supports are out there, and that it's kind of people's fault, rather than recognizing all of the systemic and community issues and family issues that go into the issue of homelessness. I think going along with that is that idea that there's this huge separation, I think is a myth, between people experiencing homelessness and people not experiencing homelessness. And I think a lot of the statistics and a lot of the research says, you know, a lot of us are one paycheck away from being able to unfortunately experience homelessness. And I think that that gap and that separation and that idea that this is like a completely different universe almost is kind of, again, what like takes away that responsibility sometimes in society. So I guess those are two, but those are a couple.
And I found it very interesting with what you were saying about the type of language that we need to use when discussing people that struggle with homelessness. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about that and maybe some appropriate language that people can use and maybe some resources that people can maybe read about people that are struggling with homelessness and can kind of become more educated themselves?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, it's really important for me to kind of recognize my place in terms of my perspective coming into this. I've done a lot of community work and research in poverty reduction and homelessness, but I haven't experienced homelessness. So I think, number one, I think listening to the voices of people with lived experience is so important to hear the ways that they want to be communicated with and spoken about. So I want to make sure that I recognize my voice in this. But from what I've experienced in my work, I think a lot of the time that language is using words like maybe clean, or using words like addicts, or using words like homeless, rather than maybe unhoused or experiencing homelessness, is something that I know has been kind of changing recently. And in terms of resources, I think one of the ones that I really enjoy in my work is Housing First. It's an approach that really focuses on housing individuals and uses more of a critical lens in approaching homelessness. But again, that's just from my experience.
Absolutely. And absolutely in the fact that it's important to listen to those voices and become educated in the proper language to use, like you said, is very important. And Michael, moving on towards you, many paths lead to homelessness, and we've already talked about that today, which cause people to fall in and out of it throughout their lives. What do you believe is one of the biggest myths about homelessness?
Well, I want to touch on, I love what Sophia was saying there. The lived experts matter. So there's saying nothing for us without us. So don't try and inform and change things if you don't have the voices there. Around resources, the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, Homeless Hub, any really meaningful research that's been done in the sector has been done there. That's out of York University. Check out homelesshub.ca. Very cool. And if you want easy listening, I know a podcast, we run a podcast called On the Way Home.ca with the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, Blue Door. We do it. We have a guest every week in health, poverty reduction, homelessness. People do great work around the world. We've had guests from Finland, who's the country that's closest to ending homelessness. So check that out. Easy listening On the Way Home, anywhere you find podcasts. One of the biggest myths, Susie, really is that homelessness is a look, right? And I think most Canadians are very empathetic people, compassionate people. They just don't know. And we're visual too. If we don't see it, it doesn't exist, right? So if you ask people in Windsor, York region, there's so-and-so hangs around the gas station or this area, we know that. But a lot of homelessness is really hidden. And so we're like, it's not a problem, really. There's a handful of people, and that's just simply not the truth. Much of homelessness is hidden, right? We've begun these point in time counts where we're trying to get a sense across the country of how many people are experiencing homelessness. That's language as well. And I think you're driving in that as well. When you hear Sophia and others talk about it, it's not a homeless person, it's a person experiencing homelessness, because you need to see the person first, not their situation. They are fathers, brothers, sisters, aunts, grandmothers, right? They are people first, and hopefully that experience is short-lived. If I asked some grade threes what homelessness looks like, because they may not have a filter, they will say an old guy with a big beard asking for change. So they're basically describing me, right? So that's what they've seen on TV. Maybe that's what they've seen on the streets of Toronto, right? And while they're not wrong, sometimes it does. There is no look. Homelessness is not about a look. Look around at the panel here. It's every one of us, right? That it really is more of a feeling of loneliness, isolation, and fear, especially for young people. Young people don't want that stigma. If they don't want to have that label of I'm homeless, right? And even how we address youth homelessness too is if we say, hey, do you want to come to the shelter? No, I don't need that. Do you have a safe place to stay tonight? Well, no. All right, so come crash here. It's different language and it matters. There are so many young people experiencing homelessness that you have no idea that they're doing that because they don't want others to know. It's embarrassing, right? They'll take every penny they have to make sure they have the right shoes and maybe the right phone. That's their lifeline. But they're not eating and they're getting ready for school in a gas station bathroom. They're walking the streets at night and they get labeled lazy because they're sleeping in school because they finally feel safe, right? Throughout the day. They just don't want to admit that something happened at home where they can't go back, right? Maybe they're being forced into arranged marriage, or maybe there's some abuse in the household or drug use, et cetera, addictions. But I think that's the biggest myth. And sometimes our Hollywood stars, they push that too. I heard Matthew McConaughey talking on Joe Rogan's podcast, just saying that all people experiencing homelessness need to be rehabilitated, which is pretty insulting, right? Saying that, attaching, and that's a powerful platform. Yes, there's mental health and addictions piece. And I think Jeffrey talked on that too. Man, you go and spend even one night in the winter throughout that night on the streets, you might start to self-medicate as well, just to get through the pain, to deal with your mental health challenges. If you don't have mental health challenges before you're experiencing homelessness, you may experience them throughout because lack of sleep, nutrition, love, it wears you down. And then you self-medicate, right? So there is no one look, there is no one path. Homelessness is not a look, it's a feeling. Thanks.
Wow, you touched on a lot of really important points there. And one of those was that homelessness does not have a particular look to it. And there isn't a one-stop shop for what homelessness looks like. And can you maybe talk a little bit more about your work with Blue Door and how you support people who maybe are struggling with housing in the York region as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So think about it this way. In York region on any given night, there's about 1,500 people who are experiencing homelessness. We have, with seasonal shelters, we have just over 300 spaces, huge gap, 1,200 people. The city, so that's for 1.1 million people in our region. In the city of Toronto, 3 million people, they have 8,000 shelter beds and they're full every night, right? Now, what we want to, all of us probably want to say is that The answer is not always just more shelter beds, right? There's extremely expensive for 24/7. And Sophia was talking about this, the housing first approach, and it's different for youth and seniors and 2S LGBTQ plus populations and others and women. And it's a little different, each approach. But housing first really is that approach of, it used to be, all right, you have to get clean, you have to get a job, and then we'll house you. And that never happened. So people never were housed. But now it's, hey, let's get you a safe housing. So then you can sleep and you could get a job, you could go back to school, and you could work around your health issues, etc. Right? It really is that approach. So what we do at Blue Door, really, so we work with families, we work with youth, we work with men, we work with seniors, and we have, there's not a one size all, as you said, approach. Some people need that emergency housing, and we call it emergency housing, not shelter, because even if it's for a day, that's someone's home. To say shelter has a negative connotation attached to it, right? But that's their home, even for a day, right? And others are saying, hey, look, I just need a little help with rent, manage that. We find them housing in the community, in the private market. We have other homes, transitional housing, which is 1 to 5 years. And then we have some permanent housing. But it's not enough to do that too, is once they go into housing, if you imagine that when you're in emergency housing, you got 25 buddies, you got staff that care about you, you got meals every day. And then I put you in a home, like in your own house, no meals, no friends. It really is about connecting to community as well. So that housing retention work after care is really important as well.
Wow, you guys really do touch all of it at Blue Door, and that sounds like such an incredible organization to be a part of, and that is really helping the community. And we'll move back to Jeff, and understanding the extent of homelessness and the experience of those who are homeless enables communities and services to develop support to reduce it. Now, what do you believe is one of the biggest myths about homelessness?
Hey, first I'd like to say the other two panelists, great, pretty much covered everything. The only thing I would be able to, I guess, add to that is that people assume homelessness is like people on the street. There's many people who are like couch surfing, or staying with someone else. Like they don't have a home, but they're staying, night to night with maybe a relative or friends or strangers even. So a lot of, people assume that homeless people are unemployed. Many homeless people have jobs. They just can't afford a place to live. Many that they're uneducated, that they're alone, that, there's so many assumptions that are made about people who are, quote unquote, homeless. But they're really, like they said, there is no look. Most people who are homeless, we don't know that. Like the gentleman said, most people are trying to keep up their appearance. They're trying to fit in. They don't want to stand out and look crazy. They don't want to, it's embarrassing to be homeless. You know what I mean? So, like I said, it's just that we assume we know what homelessness is or what it looks like, or, what it sounds like, what it smells like. And we really have no idea, especially in Canada and developed countries, like I say, where many people are not exactly on the street, but they don't have a place to live. So there's that gray area where so many people exist. That's where I was. Personally, I wasn't on the street, but I didn't have a home. So I was staying in people's basements and, wherever I could, wherever you could stay. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would add. I guess the little bit I could add to that is, we don't know who they are. And, a lot of them we don't know.
Yeah, thank you for talking about that gray area. A lot of people don't think about that, or maybe don't realize that is a big issue about homelessness. And we also have Christine joining us today. Hello, Christine. And we understand that homelessness is a human tragedy. It has a ripple effect throughout the community, impacts the availability of healthcare resources, crime and safety, and the workforce. But it benefits all of us to break this cycle of homelessness, one person, one family at a time. What do you believe is one of the biggest myths about homelessness? And you are on mute, so you may have to. Christine is on mute, so I'm not sure if she's, give her a moment to respond. Okay, maybe Christine is having some issues with her mic. So we'll quickly move back to Sophia. You work as a registered social worker and publish your own research. Through the work that you have done, what have you seen that moves towards more positive outcomes for those experiencing homelessness?
I think we kind of briefly chatted about this already, but to reiterate, I think utilizing human rights and like housing first approach is really critical and important from my experience, and focusing on prevention work. So destigmatizing, like we've kind of talked about, there's so much stigma around homelessness, and working on destigmatizing the experience of homelessness, and also recognizing that housing is a human right, while also working on all of the other issues that we've been talking about systemically, and in the community as well. So that kind of perspective is really rooted on like that human rights perspective that argues everybody should have housing that is safe, that is affordable, that's sustainable, and allowing people to remain out of homelessness because of systemic, structural, or individual factors is really just not appropriate or acceptable in the society that we live in, and that it's a community issue that we should all support each other in. So I think that from my research and my work has been a really interesting way of unlearning and relearning how to talk about and understand homelessness. So I think just that idea that like nobody is deserving of housing, that we are all deserving of housing, is really, really important, and advocating for more affordable housing has been some interesting perspectives that I've seen.
Absolutely. And that kind of ties in to Michael, and we've already chatted about this, Michael. You continue to work hard with your team of dedicated and talented professionals to prevent homelessness in the York region through Blue Door. But through the work that you have done, what have you seen that moves towards more positive outcomes for those experiencing homelessness?
Susie, we as a society, when it comes to things like homelessness, are reactive and have put all our funds into reacting and emergency services. And it's already happened. So I think what we need to see is a bit, and what's worked is a changing that system where you look at, let's go further upstream. Where did this start? What are some things we can actually do to prevent homelessness from ever occurring, right? We can't end homelessness if we don't stop new people from entering into it, right? So we can't have that conversation about ending homelessness. And what simple things too, like shelter diversion. That just means asking some questions when someone calls in. Instead of saying yes or no, do you have a shelter space or emergency housing space? It's, what's your situation? Maybe they can stay at home. Maybe we could do some family reconciliation or something like that. Maybe there's a different approach to that. So listen, it's a slippery slope. For youth, we have a 2-year window. If they stay within homelessness there, it is a lifetime of homelessness. I can tell personally, my sister, I'm 50, my sister's 52. From the age of 16, we just didn't have those preventative types of services. She had 2 loving parents, in and out of homelessness, and it has been lifetime. She's now 52 years old, still struggling, right? Without that, I firmly believe, had those services been there, it might be a different story. But even system prevention too, we talk about that. We have to look at schools and recognizing youth that might be experiencing homelessness or on the verge of that, to wrap services around them to keep them in school. Youth who drop out of school are way more likely to experience homelessness, right? So we have to work upstream and wrap services around youth. We have to look at families. How do we keep them together and give families the supports so there's not family breakdown, as Jeffrey talked about too, right? So the preventative piece, and then the aftercare piece too. You can't just put someone in a home and think that's great, because they're going to end up circling back to emergency housing. They need to be connected to community. They need those supports. They need help around life skills sometimes, so it's that aftercare too. Prevention and aftercare are also extremely way more affordable than emergency housing, right? And, someone who's unhoused, to use Sophia's language too, as we should, it goes to the emergency department 5 times more than someone who is housed, right? They're spending time there in hospital beds that are super expensive, and they're being discharged into homelessness, right? So if we could get people housed and wrap services around them, not only does it save dollars on the emergency housing system, but on our medical system, our legal system, all those different things. Housing is a human right, and we've seen that declared by the federal government. What needs to happen next is how do we make that actionable, right? In Wales, they have something called the duty to assist, where the government has 2 weeks to find housing for that person. And if they don't, that person can take action against the government, right? That forces people along and makes that right actionable.
And that's really interesting. And something that I wanted to ask you is do you think that there's a particular city in the world that maybe you've seen or have heard of that is really doing a lot of preventive work and is really doing their best to eradicate homelessness, that maybe Windsor or York can look to for some inspiration?
Well, absolutely. So in Australia, there's something called the Geelong Project, which is now the Upstream Project. And in this area, they looked at, and it was a long-term study too, they would do a survey inside of a few high schools. And that survey really got at who are youth that need wraparound supports immediately, et cetera, and wrap those services around them. And what they did is they drastically decreased the dropout rate. And what that meant is fewer youth were experiencing homelessness. So their emergency housing for youth emptied out. So they drastically decreased people experiencing homelessness, focus on prevention. So we took that upstream approach, and the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness and Away Home Canada, which is a national youth focusing group on homelessness, brought that to Canada. So in Newfoundland, Choices for Youth, 360 Kids in York region, the Raft in Niagara, they're doing work in schools. They're working upstream with that project to prevent homelessness. So really, we look at Australia for leading that work on prevention of youth homelessness. They've got 10 years of data. Data research matters when you're trying to inform policy and get funding. So that's where we look to. And really, listen, you don't have to have an absolutely, innovative and fresh idea. It's okay to borrow ideas from around the world that are working and tweak them for Canadian context, right? And we see a lot of that happening, as we should.
Absolutely. And thanks for that example. I'm sure a lot of us will kind of do our own research as well to see what we can do. And moving back to our final question with Sophia, we've already talked about this a bit today. The causes and solutions to homelessness are complex. There's a lot that an individual and a community group can do to help. No matter what your skills, interests, age, or resources, there are ways that you can make a difference. So what immediate or tangible actions can young people take this year to support those who are experiencing homelessness?
So I think that there's so many different things, and particularly as a social worker and as a therapist, I think that my understanding and my perspective is that there's so many different ways that we can support people and different actions that we can take, whether it's on the individual level, whether it's more policy and research oriented. And I think Michael earlier named some wonderful resources that I look to a lot: the Homeless Hub, Housing First, and the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. And from that, in most regions, there are alliances within that community. So for Windsor, Essex, the Windsor Alliance to End Homelessness was one of the places where I interned and learned a lot about a lot of really critical information coming out about housing and homelessness prevention. So I think looking at those resources, doing some research, like we said, I think the work that's being done and some of the stigma around homelessness is so polar opposite. So as youth, to kind of start unlearning at a young age and to relearn a little bit more of a critical, more human rights approach to the way that we understand homelessness is really important. So looking into those resources, maybe learning a little bit more or learning different things than what you knew before, maybe challenging people if you hear people using language that's inappropriate. I think all of those things are things that we don't necessarily think of as direct action, but they are. And then, of course, there's like volunteering, getting involved in your community, and listening to people that are experiencing homelessness, I think is like something that's very key to take away from all of this. I remember individuals telling us how important it is for, as fundamental as this sounds and as obvious as it should already be, treating individuals experiencing homelessness like individuals, like Michael was saying, as a person first. And that is so important in the way that we approach this work.
Absolutely. And you touched a bit about work that we can do to volunteer to help. And I'll just back to Jeffrey really quickly at Feed Windsor Essex. I skipped over you there for the last question, but I kind of want to just quickly go back and mention that you're a deep believer of community service. That Sophia kind of talked about right there, and understand that volunteering time and energy is an important practice. You show this obviously through being a certified instructor, yoga instructor, mental health advocate, and healer. Going back to the previous question, and I'll kind of give you two here, through the work that you have done, what do you see that moves us towards more positive outcomes for those experiencing homelessness? And what are some of those tangible efforts that young people can take this year to support those who are experiencing homelessness?
Well, first I'd like to say Michael and Safia, they pretty much covered all of the the reasonable bases. The only thing I was trying to think of what I could add to that, I was thinking like, well, of course, volunteering is probably one of the most important things that young people can do. And I know they need to make their hours anyways. So it's a great way. I mean, it's a great way it's a win-win, right? They get their hours and, they come out and help some people, and they can kind of really engage the situation. Because like, I think one of the big problems is like, there's too much talk about the situation and not enough people actually making the effort to assist each other. Like, we're all here together, we're all humans here together. And it's not like there's housed people and unhoused people, and there's somehow two separate species. All of these unhoused people, homeless people, whatever term we want to use, there are family members. There are relatives, our loved ones, our children, our grandparents, and they're just out here roaming the streets, and we're acting like we don't know them. So I would say, from young people, I mean, encourage your families to go reclaim their family members. Go find your family members. Go let them know you love them and you want them to come home. Speak to them, communicate to them. Reach out. Don't just let these people, go find them. That's my suggestion, not to the young people, but like to encourage their families, their adult family members, because they can really affect change within the adults. When they go home, they can bring some of this home and explain some of this maybe to their parents who are maybe not so knowledgeable about the situation or whatever. And then to the second part of the question, what I would say to young people is, do all of the things that they can do for themselves to keep themselves from becoming homeless. To not add to the problem. Get educated, form healthy relationships, stay connected to your family and your friends, create a community network by, volunteering and, things like that. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's my perspective is, make sure it doesn't happen to you. Do your best to make sure it doesn't happen to you. And then that way you can help people,
And Jeffrey, for those who are maybe interested in getting involved with Feed Windsor Essex, can you explain how people can do that, or how the young people who are watching today can maybe get involved?
Yeah, actually, we're located at a church called New Song Church. It's on the address. Excuse me, I don't have the actual information. We're on Edna and Drouillard, right in the Drouillard corridor. So we're in Ford City. So that's an area of town where there's a lot of, we do a lot of outreach in the actual neighborhood. So they can reach out to our director named Roger Fordham. Just if they Facebook Feeding Windsor, they can Google Feeding Windsor. It's easy to find. So just look up Feeding Windsor, reach out to Roger Fordham. He's our director, and we'll make space for anyone to come down here and help out as much as they'd like to help out. We can always use the help. We're actually understaffed right now, so any volunteers would be wonderfully appreciated. Yeah, so it's very easy. Just come on down, show your face. It's a very friendly place, and we'll bring you in.
That's awesome.
Puts you to work.
Thank you so much for that. And moving back to Michael, we've talked about this with Jeff and with Sophia, that advocacy is critical to creating the systemic changes needed to end homelessness. It means working with people experiencing homelessness to bring about positive changes in policy and programs at the local, provincial, and federal levels. So for you, what do you think are some immediate or tangible actions young people can take this year to support those who are experiencing homelessness?
Well, I think first of all, let's stop with accepting that good enough is good enough, right? I think, providing a cot and a roof over someone's head and saying that's good enough, not good enough. That's not housing. We have to look at housing, and we have to stop accepting good enough being good enough. Food banks are not the answer. They're a result of things like homelessness. Before your voice counts, it is only through collective impact that we make change happen. In the federal election, through so many different voices and organizations coming together, housing wasn't on the menu. It really wasn't up there. And together, it became, I think, number 2 in priorities in the federal election. That's only because your voices were heard. You have a voice. Right now in Ontario, we have a provincial election coming up. You may be too young to vote, but your voice is still important. There's the Vote for Housing campaign that's happening right now. Ontario Non-for-Profit Housing, the Co-op Federation of Canada, Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness are all pushing this Vote for Housing campaign in Ontario. Have your voices heard. You know what? Homelessness was not a massive issue before the 90s. It was policy changes in income supports and housing policies. The federal government got out of building thousands of affordable housing units each year. It was a change of policy. Then we saw homelessness skyrocket, right? So policy matters. So your voice is what's going to change policy, what's going to change our systems, what is going to change our society. So have your voice heard. Be involved, get involved, talk to your local politicians, and keep pushing it forward. Work to change systems and don't accept good enough.
Absolutely. Don't accept good enough. And we have somebody in our chat who is asking, Michael, can you please name that Australian organization again that is working towards ending homelessness that you said was a really good example that we can use?
It's called the Geelong Project out of Australia. And it's Dr. David McKenzie that led that research. Okay.
Thank you for that. We'll add it to the chat so everyone can see to do their own research. And we have Christine joining us here. Christine, I'd like to ask you the same question, but you have some great experience at a local level. Maybe you can also touch upon what actions can young people take this year to support those who are experiencing homelessness?
Okay, first off, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Oh, great. I had a little trouble joining, actually a lot of trouble, but here I am. What I've noticed when we first started Street Help, that was 23 years ago, we dealt with 12 to 25 people within a day that were acutely homeless. Mm-hmm. Here we are now, 23 years later, and we're dealing with hundreds of people. At Street Help, we feed over 400 people a day right now. That's massive. That's massive, and it's horrible. And what we need to learn most about the people who are homeless, really, why are they homeless? Before we judge. Did they leave a bad situation? Did they lose their job? Do they have a mental health issue? And mental health issues are so varied. We have some people who can't live in a shelter because they can't be in enclosed places or they can't be surrounded by others. I think the biggest thing we need to put on our agenda when helping the homeless is who are the homeless? Let's really figure out who these people are, why they're homeless, how we can truly help them. And sardining people in shelters has become a thing with government. We as the people have to put a stop to that. A shelter was originally called emergency shelters. They've changed that. And they took the word emergency away. And that's really what it was intended to be. So if we can figure that out, that we need the housing, how can we as a group of people, I know there's Habitat for Humanity, for example. Well, that's fine and good, but that's just a program for a family that they're employed and they're able to continue to live in the house. Couldn't we have a different kind of Habitat for Humanity type model program where we're building small homes? We can find land and build the homes on them and actually house people. I don't know. It's one of my ideas. I don't know if it'll come to fruition as quickly as I would like it to be. But I was homeless, and I would have wished back then, instead of people bullying me, abusing me, I wished back then people would just talk to me, find out where I was, what was wrong, was there any way that they could help me? And I think that's the greatest focus I have right now in trying to teach people who are there. I see folks out there every day, and so many of them are so wonderful, so kind. What about the man who froze to death on the sidewalk not that long ago, right? He was one of the kindest people you would meet. He couldn't live in a shelter because people abused him. They took advantage of his check that he would get in the mail. He had a higher disability check because he had been employed. And sadly, that's what took his life. Why couldn't we have found a way to house him in a nice, secure little spot? He'd be alive today. So as we learn who the homeless are, why they're homeless, it can help us to make decisions on what kind of housing we can find for them. I've often said, and I apologize if you hear phone calls coming in, I don't have anybody to take the calls, so they'll have to leave messages. I've often said, if we could take that individual and learn that, okay, his issue is he can't live with other people. Why can't we find a very small little house somewhere and renovate it, let him live there? Another option I put out in the community is we take the Windsor housing units and give them back to the homeless. Take all the families we put in Windsor housing units. We can relocate them into all these abandoned homes, renovate the home, move the family in. How wonderful for those children to have a yard to play in. That's better than putting folks in housing situation. But even a housing situation for the homeless becomes a different type of emergency housing. But it's, I think, something that's doable in our community. Renovating the houses, the tiny homes that they're building, the shipping container homes. I think these are all good ideas and good options for our folks. I hope I'm not overusing my time talking. Okay,
No.
because I'm very
Yeah.
passionate. I am very passionate about my folks, and I know the most that Street Help can do right now, we can give people sleeping bags as we have them, backpacks as we have them. We send them for clothing down to the homeless hub. It's only a few blocks away, and so I don't have to go through those donations anymore, which is great. My time is too consumed. But it breaks my heart to see us feeding not just kids now. And what's adding to the homelessness? Do you know that we have families bringing their children here at lunch from school? They don't have enough money to live on. So we need government to increase the amount of support they're giving to people on welfare and disability. Through COVID, they didn't get any extra help. And that's another sad thing. Think of all the seniors, disabled, should have been entitled to a little more support as well. And that creates problems within the community that take away what little housing there is. And we're watching some families living with each other. They don't want to, they want a home of their own. But there's no choice. The only way they can keep food on the table. And thank God we're blessed with food. We're able to feed all the people. But 400 plus people a day is just astronomical.
Yeah.
And shouldn't be. Yeah.
And thank you for sharing those actions that people, not just young people, but everyone can take to support. And the work that you do is really incredible. And we all applaud you and everyone there volunteering their time and helping. It's over 400 people. That is an astronomical number. And and I think has really opened our eyes to see what is going on in the local level in Windsor, Essex. So thank you for sharing that. And we have just a couple of minutes to maybe get some questions from the audience. Maybe one or two we can ask our panel today. Jessica, do we have any to go? And then we'll finish off today. Hopefully those who are watching today from all of the different high schools are really learned something today, and we appreciate that. So if we have none yet, maybe we can just quickly for Christine, can you just maybe mention if people would like to get involved in helping at Street Help Homeless Center? Can you maybe explain some of the resources there quick?
Oh, absolutely. If you want to come and get involved, and actually you can do community hours here. We are primarily focusing on feeding people. Sorry, I have asthma, so I talk funny sometimes. We're cooking all day. You can help prep food in the kitchen. There's always pots and pans to wash. We don't do dishes, it's takeout. You can help serve up the food into the containers, actually hand food out to the homeless if you want to keep back in a way you don't want too much contact, that's fine too. We respect everybody. If you want to wear a mask, you can. If you're like me and you have asthma and you can't, we do have face shields, or you can go without. But please, we always need helpful hands in here. It's a great place to come and learn differently. We had a volunteer recently who was a politician, and this lady has spent some time, and her opinion totally changed from what you see on the outside of the building to what is happening on the inside. We feed more than a lot of restaurants do. So it's amazing. Come and you can get some great experience actually serving the people. And it gives you peace in your own heart too, to do something that's filled with love, and you're doing it for God. And that's the primary focus. We are a faith-based agency. We want you to feel comfortable here, and we welcome all faith.
And Christine, where are you guys located?
We're at 964 Wyandotte Street East. Our serving area is called the soup kitchen. So you'll see it there. Just come to our side door or call ahead of time. Say, I want to come and I want to volunteer. You're more than welcome. More than welcome. And today I'm going to be putting up on our Facebook page our most recent newsletter. And it explains a lot, I believe, in there. It gives a lot of helpful information and understanding who the homeless are and how other ways you can help. So I think that's important for folks to know. And it's best to get into the spirit of doing for others when you're young. And it'll stay with you for your life. It's not a burden. You'll take from it, and that's the most important thing.
Absolutely. And that sounds like a really wonderful resource for people to use. And one more question, Christine. Yes. What are your operating hours? Are you open 24/7? Are you open in the mornings, evenings, if people are looking to volunteer?
Because of COVID, we're now we're here at the center usually by 9 until 5 p.m. But we serve food through the window from 11 until 5 p.m.
Okay.
But otherwise, we are here. So working hours would be more either 9 to 5 or 11 to 5, whatever is most suitable for the person.
Okay, yeah, that's really wonderful. And then hopefully we have a large group joining us today on YouTube that are watching. So hopefully you will get a lot of people out volunteering, which would be really great. I would think we're good to conclude. We have no further questions from the audience, but I believe that we really touched on a lot of things today and had some really great discussion. So I conclude by thanking you all for attending the Assumption University Father Joe Quinn Social Justice Seminar Series, particularly the many students and teachers who joined us today. We were pleasantly overwhelmed with the tremendous show of support. And of course, I invite you all to attend next year's seminar series. I thank all of those today who made this event possible, including our 4 panelists, Safiya Abdul, Michael Braithwaite, Jeff Manier, and Christine Wilson-Furlonger. On behalf of Assumption University, I thank the Cohen family for their generous donation. This is Charles and Ethan Cohen Family Foundation. And on behalf of the Assumption University, they have ensured that social justice education remains at the forefront in our community. So lastly, this event would not have been possible without the members of course, our Social Justice Committee, which included Amina Abdul, Moira Belmore, Cecile Bertrand-Scory, Betty Brush, Dr. John Capucci, Jessica Lemon, and Miriam Tolson-Murty. I wish each and one of you a successful academic term and look forward to welcoming you back to next year's series. In the meantime, you can feel free to friend Assumption University on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. I'd like to wish everyone a great day, take care, and goodbye, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll just wait for the